My name is Rajiv Parinja. I'm a psychiatrist here in Toledo, Ohio, and I'm going to talk to you about stress. And before I start, I want to thank the Dory Foundation for giving me this opportunity, and particularly my good friend Dr. Javier Rathor, who introduced me to Dory. To understand stress, we first have to understand a little bit about how our brain produces certain clusters of emotional responses or behavioral responses to particular situations. Now, these responses are, in theory, adaptive. Adaptive means that they help us cope with a particular situation. But in the modern environment, some of these responses, which would have been adaptive in a different situation, are no longer adaptive and they can be unhelpful. To take an example, most of us, if we have the opportunity, tend to eat a little more than what we need to. And if we have the chance to not exercise and use a car, for example, to get somewhere, we would do that. And as a result, when we have plenty of food and we have access to technology such as cars and vehicles or scooters, we tend to end up gaining weight. Now, we recognize that this is a problem and we can do something about it. We can schedule and make ourselves exercise more than we feel like doing, and we can also watch what we eat and make sure that our weight is healthy. So we have to compensate for these inherent tendencies. And we'll take this and try and understand how stress happens and what it does to us. And to explain this, I'll take the story of a master. This is a master of sword fighting. So he's maybe living 500 years ago, and he's got a school, he's got a great reputation, and he gets students from his local area, but he also gets students traveling from far away who want to learn from him. So one day, a new student turns up. He says, I have already learned under a different master, and I'm good at what I do, but I've heard great things about you, and I want to improve my skills, and please give me a chance to learn under you. So how is the master feeling at this time? Well, the master is interested, and we would say that his psychology and physiology is a little bit that of a challenge straight. He's going to pick up his sword, he's going to see what the student knows, and he's not uncomfortable. He does not expect it to be a problem. In fact, he's looking forward to it. He might be thinking that, I can show this student a few tricks and also show my other students how good I am. Now, as the master starts fighting this new student, he finds that this student is actually very, very good. So good that the master is struggling to keep up. Now, this situation produces a stress response in the master. He is finding that psychologically, he's feeling a little unhappy and uncomfortable. He doesn't like this situation. He wants to get away from it. He's also tending to blame himself for putting himself in this situation. Like, why did I start fighting with somebody who I didn't know? We didn't know how good they were, and now I have put a lot of things at risk. My reputation is at risk. My safety is at risk, because if this guy is really good, he will end up injuring me and potentially killing me. Physiologically, the master is going to have a rise in blood pressure, rise in heart rate. He might find himself beginning to sweat. But his peripheral vessels will begin to constrict to minimize the risk of blood loss, and his blood will actually increase in coagulability, which is important to save him should he get a major cut. All of these are adaptive. Now, let's look at the stress response today, and we can find that if we are in a situation where maybe we are doing a presentation, or we are in a meeting where there is a difficult discussion happening, maybe you are seeing a patient who is just being more demanding. You might have a stress reaction. You might have all of the same things that the master had. You might get a rise in your heart rate, a rise in your blood pressure. You might feel tense. You will psychologically have this reaction where you say, I don't want to deal with this. This is too much. I want to get away from this situation. And you will also have increased coagulability of your blood and also vasoconstriction. Now, those are not helpful because they can actually put you at risk of having a stroke or a heart attack if you are at that physiological state where you are just slightly removed from that situation and you are old and frail. As a young person, you'll probably be quite all right. But if you are chronically stressed, that can lead to other problems. For example, a sustained high level of cortisol will increase your sugar levels, put you at risk of diabetes. It actually even changes some of the receptors in your brain, in the emotional parts of your brain, to make you emotionally more reactive. So there is measurable change that happens in the brain from chronic stress. And we know that chronic stress can lead to a number of physical health problems, and it can actually reduce your lifespan. So stress has these two parts. One is psychological, the other is physiological. It is potentially helpful, but it may not be helpful for the given situation, and chronic stress is not good for us. What can we do about stress? So the first thing is to realize that this is an adaptive response which is a misfit for the situation you're facing. Once you know that, you can actually change the way you approach stress. And what we know is that if you change the way you approach stress, it changes your physiology, it changes your psychology, it actually changes some of the brain chemistry. For example, we find that people who approach a stressful situation as a challenge, where they say, you know what, I'm going to take this on, I'm going to be okay, this is going to be exciting, it's going to be fun, I'm going to learn something from it, and even if I don't do well, that's okay. It doesn't really matter because it's not a big deal. These people tend to have higher levels of DHEAS, that's dehydroepiandrosterone, which is a neurochemical which tends to work like a neurosteroid. And they have lower levels of cortisol. And we saw that cortisol increases your sugar levels, and it is adaptive but not necessarily helpful. Studies have demonstrated that by priming people to respond to stress in a particular way, you can actually change their measured DHEAS to cortisol ratio. In people who have been under stressful situations, such as people who have been in war, like Vietnam veterans, when we measure their levels of cortisol DHEAS, we find that those who have higher levels of DHEAS actually have lower mortality over the time that the study goes on. So what do you do when you deal with a stressful situation? Here are some tips for that. The first thing you need to do is you need to recognize that you are stressed. And you might say, well, you know, if I'm stressed, I know I'm stressed. You may be right, but very often people are so sucked in by the stress that they don't notice that they're stressed. Our brain's ability to pay attention is limited, and when we are paying attention to the situation that is stressing us, we may not know that we are experiencing stress. It is worth asking this question when you're not feeling too great. What am I feeling? Studies have shown that when you name the emotion you're feeling, you get a little bit of a break from that emotional process. So you need to recognize and say, oh, I'm feeling stress. And when you feel stressed, you might be inclined to say, oh, why do I always become stressed? This is not right. I am not good at coping with stress. Why do these situations arise? Why do people do this, do these things that make me stressed? You might want to blame yourself, blame other people. But you don't want to do that. What you want to do is to validate your emotional state, to be kind to yourself and say, it's okay. It's normal to be stressed. Everybody experiences stress, and that's okay. I can probably do something about the situation which allows me to come out better for it. You would say, you know, I'll learn something from it. I will be able to handle it. And what's the worst that can happen to me from this stressful situation? My body is reacting like it's going to kill me, and maybe I'm at risk of bleeding to death, but that's not the case at all. I'll be okay. And when you reframe it like this, your chemistry in your brain will change, your physiology will change, and your stress response will go down. So this is what you do when the situation is already stressful. You can also prepare for stressful situations by practicing what you need to do. You will find that you'll be less stressed if you've already practiced. So for example, if you have an interview that you're preparing for, don't just practice the questions and learn their answers. Sit down with somebody who is going to pretend to be an interviewer, or sit down with a camera and actually try to answer those questions in the interview setting. That will be more stressful when you practice, but when you actually do the interview, you will be less stressed. So this has been again studied. When you practice going through that same situation, which is as close to possible as the situation that will stress you, you do well. Another thing that has been shown to help with stress is actually your physical health. And there is a very good correlation between your physical health and your mental health. And people who do resistance training have been shown to have an attenuated stress response, so they seem not to get ruffled that easily. So working on your physical health is very important. And finally, the big piece, I think, which determines how you cope with stress is your spirituality. And spirituality can mean different things for different people. It is your connection with God, your connection with something higher than yourselves. If you don't believe in God, you can still have spirituality, because you kind of realize that the universe or nature is really big and you are just a small part of that. So spirituality is a big topic, and I might do a different talk on that. But people who are spiritually inclined seem to do better with stress. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments to this video, and I'll try and answer them. And if there are other topics that you would like me to address, please put them down and I will try and get to it. And I thank you for listening to this talk, and if you have any suggestions about how I can make this better, please let me know.